All righty. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Everybody say hi to Steve Berkley. He's my co-host tonight and the producer of the Living with Ghosts movie. And we thought it would be fun to do a live Q&A about woo-woo, about the movie, about communicating with spirit, and about the research and how it helps people who are grieving just figure out how to live without their loved one in human form, but knowing that they're around in spirit form. So Steve, welcome. Thank you for taking
Good to be
the
here,
time.
Julie.
You bet.
You.
You bet. Live from New York, right?
Exciting. Yes, we're in New York.
Live from New York and Sweet Home, Alabama for me. So welcome, everybody. We'll have more join us, I'm sure, as we go through this. So Steve, start us off. Tell us a little bit about you as a movie guy and how you got in the business. What made you decide to take this track in your career? And then eventually I want you to talk about why you decided to do this movie. But I think it would be fun just to get to know you a little bit.
That's nice. People very rarely ask me to get to know me. It just doesn't happen for whatever reason. Well, I went to school in Florida and I came back to New York after I graduated because this is my hometown. And I was working in a relatively dry career in accounting. And at some point I realized I wasn't an accountant. That wasn't really my thing. And I got a job with MTV networks. That was more my speed. And I was basically writing for MTV when it just started. So I was
you're dating yourself. You're dating yourself. So when was that?
I was in the first team, first marketing team at MTV when it was just a burgeoning network, cable network. And that was pretty exciting because nobody knew it was going to work, and it did work. So that was pretty exciting to be there. But that was the late 80s, early 90s kind of a thing. Anyway, so I got started in this particular film and this particular topic because my dad died. And when my dad died, my mother pretty much fell apart. And I went down to Florida with my brothers and we did everything we were supposed to do when somebody dies. We got her into grief counseling, a support group, got her into religious services. We got her into all this great stuff, but nothing had any impact on her at all. So at some point, we had to basically return to our lives. And my mother gave me a call and said, she just sounded better. She sounded more chipper. And I said, Mom, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You sound great. What's going on? And she said, Stevie, I think your father's still in the house with me. So I didn't know what to make of that, but I was just really happy that she was feeling better. And I ended up, well, that's in a nutshell, like how the whole movie thing got started. Is my mother was having some kind of interaction with my father, what she perceived to be my father, and that was making her feel better. But I could fill in the blanks from there if you lead me with questions.
Yeah, what was going on? Was she talking with him? Could she see him? What was she experiencing?
There was a light blinking in the house, and we had a kooky neighbor. I call her kooky because at the time I thought she was kooky. Now I don't. But we had a very open neighbor who came over and said, Irene, a light was blinking when my husband died too. Maybe that's Sai saying hello. And my mother really didn't think much of that at the time. And as a matter of fact, she kind of resisted the idea altogether. She was not really, her husband had just died. She didn't really want to hear this. But after a while, after a couple of months with the blinking light, my mother decided to have a conversation with the blinking light. And that's what was really making her feel a lot better. She made the tragic mistake, however, of sharing this with her grief counselor. And her grief counselor said, Irene, that's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. That's not the way out of grief. Now, I happened to have been there in Florida when this conversation was taking place. I didn't witness the initial conversation, but when I saw what was going on with my mother and I saw how people were reacting to her. And at some point I wanted to get a film crew down there and just start filming. And that's when I captured the grief counselor saying to my mother what she said to her in the film. By the way, my mother is Irene in the film. That's my mom. And then Ethel, her friend, her kooky neighbor, who writes to her deceased husband. She was basically, I don't know how to say it. She was basically doing the same thing. She was having a post-mortem relationship, and that was making her feel great.
Did you find, after you were hearing this from your mom initially, did you find that you were researching this then? I mean, you obviously were led to this through your mom and your
Yes.
dad, but did you research automatic writing? Did you research communicating with the deceased? Did you talk to people? What'd you do?
I did a bunch of research. My motive was, at first, initially, I just thought it was a cute story between these two women who were friends and bridge partners and neighbors who were very much they were both going through grief around the same time, but they were having very different experiences in grief. And I thought that was a nice juxtaposition to make a movie about this odd couple. And the one that, of course, is the believer is the one that's doing a lot better. But when the grief counselor and other people too, friends and Ethel, psychiatrist, when they started dismissing the idea of after-death communication as a legitimate modality to help you with bereavement, that's when I started researching, because I wanted to support my mother and her community of widows, because she was in this de facto widows group in a way in Florida. Her whole community basically had lost their husbands, because women outlived their husbands by 7 or 8 years. And so everybody around my mother's circle wanted to, I'm sorry, a little sign just came up on the screen. I had to just click it. Everybody's my mother's circle were going through pretty much the same thing. They were having some interactions with their late husbands. Not everybody was doing something as overt as automatic writing like Ethel was, but everybody was doing something. They were sensing their husband's presence. One of the widows smelled her husband's cigar smoke in the house. She didn't like it when he was alive, and she liked it even less when he was deceased. But she figured that must be his way of saying hello. And then one of her friends was seeing her dead husband occasionally. So these women were having these experiences, but they were not being supported by the mental health professionals that were in their lives. So my research was all based on trying to support my mother and her friends who were having legitimate interactions with the unseen. And when I did the research, it didn't take me long at all. It took me a couple of keystrokes on Google to find out that this research has been around forever. And the most notable, in terms of one of the professors I contacted, said, look up Dewey Rees. Dewey Rees was a physician in the 1970s who went into Wales and did a study involving 300 widows and widowers. And he asked one simple question: what is helping you get through grief the most? And he was very surprised to find out the most popular answer was getting a visit from my deceased loved one. That's what helped me get through my grief. That was the game changer for me. And then he went on to become a hospice physician, and he wrote a textbook on hospice care. But he did a very thorough study in 1971 that's published in the British Medical Journal that involved himself and medical colleagues. And they tested this very thoroughly. They weeded out all the people who had any kind of mental health issue. They weeded out all the people who had any kind of, if they were sleeping when they had this visit, or I'm sorry, if their eyes were closed in bed when they had the visit, they were dismissed from the study. They just wanted to get a very clean sample of people who were awake, lucid, and were having after-death communications with their late spouses. And 47% of these people had this experience out of the 300. That's a lot of people.
Well, you talk about too in the movie, you make Bible references. And I haven't, you sent, I sent you a note and I said, okay, I need all those Bible verses,
Right.
Bible references. I haven't had a chance to look them all up, but how did you find those and what led you to, certainly that's a text that most people will be, at least if they don't know about the Bible, they're going to look it up. Most people at least are familiar with the concept of the Bible, even if they haven't read it. So what are some of those verses and what are the ones that you find to be the most applicable with people communicating with the deceased
Well,
or
I'm
with
going to,
spirit or with spirit?
well, I'll be honest with you, Julie. Can I be honest with you, Julie?
Please. I don't want you to lie to me.
The research I did to find those Bible verses was basically go on Google and say, please give me a list of all the Bible verses that have to do with after death communication. That was my list. I didn't actually research individual Bible verses, probably because I'm agnostic. I'm just not a religious person. And it would be very alien to me to actually look up Bible verses, even though a thorough documentarian perhaps would. So maybe I'm just copping out and I'm not religious. But I'm sorry, but that was probably the weakest area of my research were the Bible references.
Well,
Sorry.
I'm gonna look them up when,
Please
when I
do.
get a minute. And
I hope you don't unmask me as a fraud.
well, no. But has anybody done that watched the movie? Has anybody looked up some of those Bible verses that I gotta text somebody here that's having trouble getting on the Zoom for some reason. Hang on one second. Did anybody get a chance to look that up? And there we go. See what they were. Okay, I'm going to look them up and I'll post it and I'll send it to you.
Where did Ingrid go? Are you Ingrid, or is the person next with that just went out of the room, Ingrid?
Ingrid. That's all right. Did she go? She went to go get her Bible to look it up. Maybe.
Is that what it was?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I think throughout the Bible, it's angels appearing and giving messages to Joseph, when the baby Jesus go back by a different way, so he doesn't get slaughtered by King Herod, the burning bush, the Moses, the Saul, when God or spirit or angels, the angel appeared to Mary and said, you're going to have a son. And they're all throughout the Old Testament as well. And I think that's probably the most famous book that has all of these references to woo-woo. Also, university-based research, one of my favorite books that's been published in the past couple of years is by Chris Kerr, and it's called Death is But a Dream. And he did university-based research on 1,400 patients who were hospice patients. He's a hospice director. He's an MD, PhD. And he did university-based research that showed that close to 90% of the people participating in this study, they reported seeing their deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets as they were approaching death. And I know how rigorous the university-based research is because I've done it for my surgical inventions. I mean, you got to jump through a lot of hoops for that.
The professor that's in the film, Jan Holden, who has this study on after-death communication therapy. So she had one of her grad students compile some research, and she found that between 1958 and 1998, during those 40 years, there were 9 studies on this topic. And I think they all had to do with spouses. I think it's just, maybe it's more frequent with spouses, I'm not sure. But in those 9 studies, on the low end, 47% of the population were having these interactions. And on the high end, it was 90%. Maybe it was a study you just referenced, but it runs that gamut. But that's an enormous number of people, an enormous high percentage of people who are having these experiences. And we have passages in the DSM that says, well, these are hallucinations. They're normal hallucinations, but they're hallucinations, which is kind of weird. I mean, it's great that it's in the DSM finally, that these are normal.
Tell everybody
Doctors are
what DSM is,
that's a
please.
diagnostic statistical manual of mental disorders. And that's what psychiatrists basically consult on a daily basis. And what was missing, for a long time, these kind of interactions were pathologized. People were told this is not normal, they should be medicated. And then at some point, perhaps partially because of the study I referenced a little bit ago, but now it's in the DSM, and psychiatrists and psychologists are cautioned not to pathologize people who have these experiences, who have these interactions with the dead. But the wording that they use, the phrasing that's used is normal hallucinations. Well, that's a contradiction, isn't it? Something can't be normal and be hallucination. By definition, hallucinations are abnormal. But they had to put it in there because people were experiencing this phenomena. But at the same time, it's a cop-out. They're not really, the American Psychiatric Association is not really quite ready to embrace after-death communication as a bona fide phenomenon. Instead, they're calling it a normal hallucination. That way they get to say, okay, well, these are things that's all subjective. This is happening just individuals. It's not happening to everyone, or it's not everybody would have this kind of thing happen to them, but it's happening a great deal of time.
Well, like Chris Kerr in his book, he talks about that his hospice patients were screened. He said it was like qualifying for a mortgage to be part of his study. He said they had to basically be screened that they were coherent and that they weren't under drugs and weren't medicated and that kind of thing. And he talks about how the colors are so real, they're so vivid. It's like all the senses are heightened. And that's what I tell people when they have visits, when people will say, well, I had this dream and oh my God, it felt so real. And I said, did it feel like it was super high def? And they said, yeah. I said, like the colors were super vivid and vibrant and the senses were heightened. And I said, and sometimes you feel like the hair on the back of your neck is standing up straight. And they said, exactly. I said, that wasn't a dream, that was a visit. That's how you can tell the difference. And what's happening when that's going on is spirit's frequency, their vibration is higher than those of us that are in human form because the body has mass. So spirit is a higher vibration. It's kind of like when you walk from a hot room into a cold room, a lot of times you'll get goosebumps because there's a change in the atmosphere, the change in the temperature. That's the closest thing I can think of to explain it. But we all communicate with spirit. Most of us just aren't cognizant of it. We all have an idea that comes in and we'll say, I got a gut feeling, or my intuition is telling me to do this. And how many of us have gone against what our gut tells us and then we regret it? Most of us have experienced that, usually multiple times throughout our lives. So how did you find this research in Texas, and what was the story behind you being able to work with them and include them in the documentary?
A great question, Julie. I was following a few different families. My own family was one, and Ethel's family was the other. And in Ethel's family, Ethel's estranged daughter-in-law, I started interviewing them. And I don't know if I mentioned this anywhere in the film. I mean, probably not. I don't think I posted this yet. I have a new cut, and in the new cut, I have text on screen in the very beginning that explain a little bit more about how this all came about, because people wanted to understand, well, what am I watching? Am I watching recreations of something that already happened? What is this? So I wanted to put in there that there are no recreations. This is actually happening to these people. It's all shot in real time. And I just lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere with that, but how did it come about?
The research, yeah. How did you get in touch with the university?
Karen's daughter really wanted to get her mother help. her mother had been grieving for many years, and she had tried all kinds of therapies and they failed. And I knew that she would be open to this kind of therapy if I found it, but I actually didn't find it. I caught wind of the UNT study, the Texas study, but it was Karen's daughter that really did the research and found it. And I happened to all coincidentally already knew about it. But I said, hey, I will pay for your family to fly to Texas and have this therapy. Turned out to be a volunteer anyway. It was no charge for it, but I paid all expenses paid trip to Texas where she can get the therapy done in one weekend. But they had it, what the deal was, I would do that, but they have to let me film not only the therapy, but film the conversations leading up to the therapy. So when Karen's daughter finally did broach the conversation to her mother, the mother had not heard of it before. And so I got genuine reactions to this therapy from the mom. And that was it's really helpful to see her process what it would mean to have this therapy. And does she really want the therapy? Does she want to feel differently about her late husband when she's so used to thinking about him in this other way?
Oh, I think you really hit on an important point there too, which is people get so identified with their pain that, okay, I'm a widow and I have this going on and I just haven't been able to get over it. And that's their identity.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And
Yeah.
that's what I got from her when I was watching the movie, was this woman really sees herself as somebody who isn't able to process grief, and that has become her identity, which is a big shift for her to go down for that therapy and for her to make some progress to say, okay, well, maybe there's more to life than this.
Yeah. I think she'd be very pleased if she heard you say that, because she doesn't really take on for herself much credit. She did it for her daughter, really. Her daughter was goading her, and she really wasn't that interested. The fact that she did it, I give her a lot of credit for that, because she seemed kind of closed to it, but she was willing to go through it.
She was afraid. She was afraid not only of it not working, but she was afraid of what if it does work?
Yeah.
What is that? That's kind of like, letting the tiger out of the cage, I guess. Well, does that mean that her husband's spirit's going to be around her all the time and be terrorizing her in the middle of the night? And, like if she goes out on a date or something, not that she had thought of that at that point, but
I think her biggest fear was that her pain was how she felt her love for her late husband. That was her love. So you take away the pain, you're taking away her love for him. That's how she remembered her love for him best. So that one of my favorite lines in the film is when her therapist starts talking to her about her pain and her being afraid of letting go of her pain. And he says to her, it's not really the pain that you want, it's him. The pain is kind of like the talisman. It's just a symbol of him, and you can do with it. That's expendable.
In the film, the people that were the helpers, that were the researchers at the university, did you do any investigating of how they were trained and what they were able to do on their own? Certainly there was a protocol during the research, but were they trained by mediums or psychics, or what was the story on that?
Well, everybody who's an IADC therapist, again, IADC stands for Induced After-Death Communication. Everyone who is a therapist in that particular procedure has to be already a therapist, a psychologist or a counselor with a certain advanced degree. Then you get the training. Now, the training is very much like EMDR training. And if you're familiar with EMDR, that's a trauma therapy. It's a trauma therapy that induced after-death communication is born out of. So the founder of induced after-death communication was administering eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy on Vietnam veterans when one of the veterans had an after-death communication spontaneously. So once that happened, and then this psychologist was able to repeat it a couple of more times with different people and realized, okay, this is repeatable, he decided to write a book. Now, this is already over 20 years ago. This is close to 30 years ago this happened. But it wasn't really a therapy until later. But this Al Botkin, the founder, trained himself about 500 or so therapists worldwide. And so this therapy has been out there. But what University of North Texas did was say, okay, this therapy is out there, but nobody seems to know about it. Let's do a comparison between this therapy and regular traditional grief counseling and see what works. Wasn't really a fair fight because people just don't get better from grief counseling typically. It just doesn't happen. But in this induced after-death communication therapy, which again is at its heart, it's a trauma therapy, you're exorcising those demons from the client. And then when that happens, those clients are able to have very often 70 to 80% of the time, the feeling that their deceased loved one is in the room with them. Sometimes they smell them, sometimes they hear them, sometimes they see them, sometimes they feel them, but they have that experience. And that experience is what completely seems to, I don't want to say heals them completely, because of course your loved one is still not on this plane with you, but whatever you're suffering from on a daily basis because of the loss, that dissipates very quickly once you have this therapy, again, 70 to 80% of the time.
Well, and in my work as a medium and a medical intuitive, I talk with deceased loved ones and their remaining family members all the time, every day during the work week. I spoke with 2 this morning who had lost a loved one, and we were communicating with them, and they were talking about all kinds of different things. And it's a conversation like you and I are having. This one gal who's a widow, she's been a widow for about 6 years, and her deceased husband told her it was time for her to start dating. And she said, oh, I don't even know where to start. And he said, well, you know that I've sent somebody to you because you need to look for the raccoon. And I thought, look for the raccoon. I don't edit anything I get from spirit because I figure, who in the heck am I to decide what you need to hear? And there are times like this morning with the look for the raccoon where I feel kind of foolish saying,
Right.
he's saying, look for the raccoon. And she gasped. And I said, what? And she said, oh my gosh, we have raccoons. We live on a farm and we have these raccoons all over the place and they drive me nuts. And so that would be the least likely thing I would look for when I meet a guy, is something to do with a raccoon. And I said, well, he wants you to expand your horizons on raccoons and know that they're not just all, pests and problematic, that Rocky the raccoon or whoever, I don't know. And so she was laughing. I said, when we got off the phone, I said, okay, let me know when you meet the raccoon man. And she said, okay, I will. Another fun story recently, a husband and his daughter called into my show, my live Q&A show, Ask Julie Ryan, on Thursday nights. And his wife and her mother had died that afternoon. And my show is at 8 Eastern, and they called me that day and wanted to talk to the deceased mom, wanted to be sure she got to heaven okay and all of that. And so the mom gave us information, the wife mom gave us information, and it really made them feel better. And then they were able to get an appointment that had canceled. They were able to get in within a few days, serendipity being what it is, no coincidences in life. But when we were talking with their deceased mom and wife that day, she started talking about graham crackers. And I thought, graham crackers, what? And I said, she's talking about graham crackers. Don't throw out the graham crackers. Does that mean anything to you? And the husband started laughing. He said, yeah, every day for her snack, she'd have Nutella on a graham cracker. And she had 2 new boxes of graham crackers in the pantry, and I almost got rid of them. And then something told me not to get rid of them. I said, well, that was your wife. And then my other favorite story, and this happened a while ago, but I love this. A young woman who lost both of her parents fairly closely with one another, who lived in Boston, said, I have their ashes, but I don't know what they want me to do with them. I think they must have died without wills and they hadn't discussed it. It was very unexpected. So I'm talking with the parents. We're having a conference call, kind of, I'm talking to them in spirit and I'm communicating what they're saying to the daughter. And I said, well, she wants to know what you want her to do with your ashes. And they said, scatter them in Yosemite. Well, Yosemite is a national park that's in the West over near California. And I thought to myself, she's in Boston, but again, I don't edit anything I get. And I said, they want you to scatter their ashes in Yosemite. Does that mean it? And she just squealed. And I said, what? And she said they were married there. So that kind of information, those are 3 really quick stories, but that kind of information gives so much comfort to the person who's grieving their loved one.
Right.
And it lets them know that they're around. And then oftentimes they'll give them signs like your mother with the blinking light or like other things. This woman today with the raccoon, her deceased husband was talking about the daffodils. He said, the daffodils are beautiful. And I said, do you have daffodils blooming? And she said, I have fields of daffodils blooming on my farm right now. So, there's no way. My daffodils bloomed 3 months ago in Alabama. So I don't have daffodils blooming, but it made sense. What a wonderful, important thing you've done with this movie to help people with their grieving and go through, okay, our loved ones are not here physically, but they're still around us.
Right. But anybody who's practicing mediumship, and of course, this, Julie, anybody who's practicing mediumship knows that after-death communication heals grief like nothing else.
Right.
But no one in the medical community seems to know that, right? Nobody in academia seems to know that. Nobody in anthropology seems to know this. So what I was hoping to do was to create a bridge by making a film about after-death communication from a scientific perspective. Because now finally somebody actually did a legitimate university research study that involves facilitating contact with the dead. I don't think that's ever happened before. So now we could point to something and say, okay, look, we have evidence. We don't have evidence that there's life after death. We can't prove that yet, but we can prove that it heals better than what people are doing traditionally. And that possibly could be a bridge to the whatever the next step is in making this something that's acceptable by the mainstream.
Well, 2 points on that. Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona.
The soul phone.
The Soul Phone Project has proven that life does exist after death. And he's getting ready to start a multi-center study with universities around the world. I'm very excited about that. And then Dr. Chris Kerr, who's done university-based research through the University of Rochester. And again, very stringent parameters as far as the research goes for him to do that. And I find that there's a lot of information about grief. There's a lot of information about near-death experiences, not so much about what happens when somebody is dying. And that's where my specialty is, that we all are surrounded by deceased loved ones and the spirits of pets and also angels as we're dying. And I call this the 12 phases of transition. So nobody dies alone ever. And I find that has become so comforting to people when they're grieving someone who is dying. And then afterwards, I was talking to a client today and she said, I gave your book to a friend who just lost their mom. It's like a funeral gift. And I said, I hear that a lot, that people will give my gift, and my church gives a copy of it to everybody that comes in to plan a funeral. So we're hitting it from a bunch of different perspectives. We're all saying the same thing and hoping to comfort people with that. One last question, then we'll open it up to everybody that's joining us and let them ask questions. what did your friends and family think? Well, your mom, of course, knew what you were doing, but what did your friends and colleagues, did anybody give you a hard time about this? Did you feel like you came out of the closet with this woo-woo stuff?
Well, I wouldn't say I was on the fence when I started making the movie. And I was taking a fairly scientific, skeptical perspective. I wasn't coming at it from, hey, I know what's real and I'm going to just share it with the world. So by coming at it from someone who's just really interested in how science can possibly support after-death communication, I didn't feel like I was really, bearing myself very much. I wouldn't, and I'd say the other part of it is that I didn't share what I was doing with a lot of people. My wife knew what I was doing, and my crew knew what I was doing, but I didn't really talk about the film. I don't know if it's because I was superstitious and I was afraid I wouldn't finish it if I talked about it, or I was afraid of if there would be some kind of, I don't know, shunning. I'm not sure, but I chose to keep it kind of quiet.
Well, I understand that. I was afraid to release my book. It took me several years to get the Golden Ovary courage to release it because, guys have breast balls and girls have golden ovaries. Well, I just thought, I'm going to have somebody like burning a cross in my front yard or something when I release this. And it hasn't happened. Actually, it's been very embraced. And another quick story, I was giving a lecture for business at a big conference in Austin, Texas. And I just put my AskJulieRyan.com website up. And I thought, okay, here we go. Somebody's going to approach me at one of my business meetings and ask me about it. Well, sure enough, I finished my talk. There's hundreds of people in the room. And this guy comes up and he's got my Ask Julie Ryan site on his tablet. And he said, "Is this you?" I'm thinking, yeah. Like, that's my picture, isn't it? I'm thinking, okay, here we go. And he said, "Well, I'm interested in talking more to you about this. Can we sit together at lunch?" And I said, "Sure." And I thought, oh, I'm just going to get pummeled at lunch. Well, come to find out, I'm sitting at a table of 8 with 7 guys and me, and we talked about woo-woo the whole time. Everybody was really interested. They weren't interested in talking about the business stuff or what my lecture had been about. They wanted to talk about woo-woo. And I find that to be very much the case with people, is they're afraid of it on the outside, but when you get with them one-on-one and they ask somebody about it, what do you think? What do you believe? That kind of thing. It's always interesting to me how people are fascinated and they want to know more.
Yeah.
And on the rare occasion where I'll have somebody say, "Well, you have to prove this to me." I'm saying, "Well, no, really, I don't. We can talk about whatever you want. You want to talk about football, the weather, whatever. We can talk about anything. So if you're uncomfortable, that's fine. I want to say you brought it up,
Yeah.
but then they circle back around and they want to talk about it."
Julie, have you heard or read of Dean Radin's stupidity hypothesis?
I have not.
So do you know who Dean Radin is?
I don't.
He's a scientist that works at the Ionic Institute in California. IONS, yeah. Institute of Noetic Sciences. That's what it is. So he came out with a hypothesis. Why are people afraid of talking about their interactions with their deceased loved ones? Because they're afraid that they'll be accused of being stupid. The stupidity hypothesis says that, educated people do not believe in after-death anything. That's the theory. But Dean Radin actually did some research and found out there are surveys on this. You can just look at poll data, and there's actually a positive correlation between education and belief in the afterlife. So the whole stupidity hypothesis has been debunked. Right. I think it's going to take a long time for people to realize that it's been debunked. But if the smarter you are, the more likely you are to believe in afterlife communication, people will feel better about admitting it.
Well, I had a conversation recently with somebody who said, "You have to prove it to me." And I said, "Well, really, I don't." And this person's very religious. And I said, "Well, do you pray?" And he said, "Of course I pray." And I said, "Well, to whom do you pray?" I was like, "God, Jesus, whomever." I said, okay. I said, so is Jesus sitting on the couch next to you when you're talking to him? And he said, no, of course not. I said, oh, well, how are you talking to him then? He said, well, he's in spirit form. I said, oh, so you're talking to a spirit real time when you're praying? And he started laughing. He's like, yeah, I guess I am. And I think when we expand into, most of us have been raised at least in the Western world, in a Judeo-Christian environment. Whether we're agnostic, whether we go to church or not, whether we believe or not is irrelevant. That's kind of the overall atmosphere that we've been raised in. And so I think when we look at most religions and cultures, talk about their elders, deceased loved ones, spirits, angels, whatever, it's that foundation's there. And people, I believe, as they've become more well-educated in the past 150 years or so, have become more proof-based. Like, you got to prove it to me before I'm going to believe it. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing. And that's what the other researchers are doing. So bravo, job well done on that. All right, let's open this up. Who's got a question for Steve or for me? I'd love to hear from you. If you'd raise your hand or put a note in there, and I will. Let's see if I can figure out where the comment things are. I don't know where that is on here. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll ask you to unmute, and then we can go from there. Anybody have a question? I know you're not shy. Ruth, why don't you start us off? Do you have a question? No? Okay. How about Suzanne? Let me get you to unmute.
You're muted.
There you go. So you got to unmute. Ask to unmute.
We might have to circle back.
Okay.
There you
Do
go.
you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Terrific.
The other day you were explaining that spirits are always good and this and that. And I just happened last week to look at a TV show that was showing, spirits that were knocking doors and making people afraid and doing all kinds of, I was just wondering about that, if it's really like bad, any spirits that can be that bad, because they were like really scary and, doing all sorts of sounds and things in the haunted house.
Steve, do you want to answer that first, and then I'll give you my 2 cents?
I think this is really more your territory, Julie.
Okay. All right. If you watched it as a TV show,
it's a show.
It's a show. It's been produced. And what does entertainment want to do? It wants to elicit an emotion of some kind. Okay. And what emotion is the most common emotion that's going to be intense? It's going to be fear, right? Mm-hmm. So fear is what gets people to keep watching most of the time. Look at the news, for heaven's sakes. The news is 99% bad news, and they get people to watch. And the more afraid people are, the more eyeballs are on the TV and watching the news, which means the more eyeballs, the more ad dollars they can sell and generate. Okay. There is no such thing as an evil spirit. And when somebody feels that there's an evil spirit in the room, that's all. Spirits are pure love. The spirits, I like to say, spirits are like the sun. They know how to do one thing, and that is send love. The sun knows how to do one thing, and it knows how to shine. If it's a cloudy day or a rainy day where you are, that doesn't mean the sun isn't shining. It means that the clouds are obstructing the sun coming in where you are, but the sun just shines. That's what spirit does. Spirit just sends love. It's pure
But Julie,
love.
are there like energies that are maybe not all the way over? Maybe they're in a different state of consciousness where they could be mischievous? Have you heard of that?
Well, here's my take on that. It's our interpretation of what's happening. There's no right or wrong, no good or bad in the spirit world, which is a really interesting concept to wrap our heads around based on what we've all been taught and how we've been raised. Certainly there is in the human perspective, because there needs to be. We can't go around shooting each other or, doing things that harm each other without some repercussions. But spirit just sees it as an exciting thing to do. So if there are noises, that's spirit perhaps trying to get somebody's attention, and they're perceiving it as scary because they've been taught that that's scary.
Okay.
I like to use the example of a gargoyle. Think about a gargoyle. If we see a gargoyle, the gargoyle looks scary.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody in an indigenous culture sees a gargoyle for the first time and they don't have a frame of reference, they're going to go, oh, cool. What's the deal on this dog? This dog looks completely different from any dog I've seen. So it's all going to be interpreted based on our frame of reference. To your point, Steve, I believe that it is a low vibration of the person receiving that vibration because they're in fear. So when we're in fear, we perceive things as being bad or wrong. And 99.9% of fear, the thoughts we have that are based in fear, are based on a limiting belief that's false and based in an irrational fear that's false. Both. That's a long answer to your short question, Suzanne.
But sometimes, Julie, there's tours. Like I remember when I went to London on a bus tour, we drove in front of a house that was considered haunted. And I guess if we're not afraid, we're gonna have the same sensation if someone's afraid, because some people have said they've heard noises or things. I think it's they can, if they touch you or something happens, does it mean you're only in fear, or it could happen really?
Well, I think it can happen, but your perspective is going to be fear. And again, it's a bus tour, so they want it to be entertaining for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're in a place and you have a sensation that there's a spirit there, initially we're all going to be freaked out a little bit because that's how we've been taught to feel when that happens. But when you know more and you know that spirit is pure love, then you can go, oh, cool. Who's here? Let's talk. What do you need? Can I help you? You got something you want to tell me? That kind of thing.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all perspective.
Okay.
That's my perspective on perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
About that. Yeah, you bet. Who else has a question? Anybody else have a question for Steve or for me? Yeah. Ingrid. You've got to unmute
Hi,
there.
actually, I'm Nancy.
Oh, Nance. Hi, Nance.
I'm Nancy. That's
Hi,
Ingrid.
Julie.
Hi, Ingrid.
So I've had the experience, for instance, riding on a train through parts of Eastern Europe and suddenly feeling very unwell and being told by somebody that I'd picked up a lot of entities and I needed to clear them off, and I needed to learn how to clear them off. Also, sometimes after performances that I would have a lot of entities stuck to me. Maybe one of you has something to say or explain about that.
Great question. Steve, you want to go?
Oh, I'm going to throw that right back at you, Julie.
All right.
That's your territory also.
He's out of your wheelhouse a little bit.
Yeah.
He's a movie guy. All right. So here's my take on that, Nance, is we have these energetic connections that are called bioplasmic streamers. They're a real thing. They, as somebody who's a physicist in a lab, can take somebody like me and I can connect to you remotely, energetically, and they can measure the frequency of that connection. When I'm connecting into somebody, it looks like a laser beam to me. When I pull it out, it looks like a really thin umbilical cord. It's really interesting. When you're performing in a venue with lots of people, you have an emotional connection to your audience because you're entertaining them and they're enjoying what you're doing. So you have lots of these bioplasmic streamers that are connected. How I teach it is you pull them out. They're in your solar plexus area, you pull them out. As far as negative entities being attached to you, again, I don't believe in negative entities or negative spirits. I do believe that the energy cords, you know how somebody will say, well, that guy never cut the cord from his mom, right? Cut the apron strings, cut the cord. That's what they're referring to. That's a very old saying. And that's what they're referring to. So some people will say, take your hand and imagine you're slicing them in front of your body. My feeling is I don't want any part of that person's cord, their energetic cord, in my body when I'm done interacting with them. So what I do is I pull them out every night when I get in bed. Before I do my prayers, I pull out any energetic cords that I have that are attached to someone with whom I've worked with or spoken to or had some interaction with during the day. Now, I leave the cord for my son and the cord for my husband in all the time because I want that connection, but everybody else's cords get pulled out. Does that answer your question, Nance?
That does, certainly, as far as the performing is concerned. But what about in areas, for instance, on the train going through areas near Auschwitz and where there were battles, and I don't know, I just had the sense of this heaviness, or all these people who were killed and maybe weren't expecting it. I don't know. Is there such a thing as people kind of being stuck and not getting to heaven or something like that?
Two-part answer to that question. Again, this is my belief. This is based on doing this work for a long time with tens of thousands of people over the years. Does energy stay in a location? Absolutely. So if you were writing by Auschwitz in a place where there was a lot of tragedy and trauma, absolutely. It could be a heavy feeling there. You're intuitive and perceptive enough that you were able to feel that. So good job. I'm very proud of you that you were able to do that. That's number one. As far as entities being stuck, I think that's what we talk about in some religions, like in the Roman Catholic religion, they talk about limbo. Somebody's in limbo. And my experience with that and my perspective on that is everybody goes to heaven. Everybody's spirit separates from their body when they die. Everybody's escorted to heaven by angels. I talk about that in my book. Some spirits choose to come back and continue the human experience without the human body, only in spirit form. So they're doing things with the people that they knew, in the circumstances that they knew before they left, because they wanted to experience kind of that 1 foot in the spirit world, 1 foot in the human world without the body kind of a thing. And again, that whole concept makes most of our human brains just want to explode. I feel like Scooby-Doo going, what? It's just, we don't have a frame of reference for that. That's what I've been told by spirit. That's my understanding of it. Does it make sense to me? No. Is it feasible? Certainly. Anything's feasible. The other thing that really can get our minds blown is we have multiple realities all happening concurrently. So we don't have a frame of reference for that. How can that be? Well, do we know for sure? We're going to know when we're dead, when we're all in heaven, when we're back in spirit form. But is it feasible? Yeah, anything's feasible. That's how there's a chapter in my book that I talk about. It's called The Train Wreck. And I was in a building where there had been a makeshift morgue. And they were bringing bodies of people who had died in this train wreck. And we, by the way, were able to find historical documents to corroborate the train wreck at the time in the area, all of that. But it only said that 12 people had died in the newspaper article from that time. And this was at the turn of the 20th century, like late 1800s. But I was having conversations with spirits from that train wreck situation, real time in this building, real time today, in today's world. And so I think that was a great example of multiple realities happening concurrently and us being able to communicate with people in those different realities at the same time. It's really wild and it's really fun. And it's really fun when we can corroborate the information with historical documentation and corroborate and validate. Does that answer your question?
And more. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. All right. Who else has a question? These are great. You can unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself, those of you that aren't on camera, if you have a question for Steve or for me. Eileen, do you have a question?
Yeah. Oh, come on. Where am I?
Okay.
Here I am.
There you go.
Great movie. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There were so many nuggets in there. Scientism being one of them. I needed that word. My question was, after I watched it, I thought, were all those people real or were they actors?
Oh, so you must have come on late because I think I answered that.
Okay. All right. I did come on late. Thank
That's
you.
okay. I'd love to talk about this topic because I was really surprised to find out that people thought that maybe these are recreations or maybe these are actors, and that's why on the next version of the film, there'll be text on screen in the very beginning that says, these are real people. These were
all of them. Yeah.
Two families that were followed by me and my crew for 7 years. And there were some things that were kind of orchestrated in a bit by me because I was telling a story. And I also I have to make sure that people are facing the camera. A pure documentarian would take a camera, point it, and say, whatever happens, happens. I'm not a purist. I like movies to be aesthetically pleasing.
You could tell that there was so much meat in there all the time.
Thank you.
As opposed to documentaries. And I enjoyed that because I had to keep pausing it and write down things.
So if it looks a little bit stagey to people, and it does at times look a little bit stagey, it's only because I had to ask people to refrain from starting to talk until the cameras are ready. And just that alone will make things seem a little bit stilted. But these are real people having a real experience, and they just indulged me and my crew to follow them around for years to capture it all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else has a question?
Hi.
Just unmute yourself. Sandy.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sandy Krieger. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you and thank Stephen. I am a therapist, and I have found that most people get the most comfort, as you said, Stephen, when they are able to talk about experiences that they've had. And I've always been open about them and, telling the experiences that they have with their deceased loved ones. And that alone, just, I can see their shoulders come down, and just the acceptance of being able to listen, and have had experiences of my own. I've also done grief groups with children for 30 years. And that is the favorite part in the grief group. It was my most favorite thing I did in the school system, was doing grief groups, because nobody talks to kids about death. And oftentimes they would share experiences that they had. But I just really came on to thank you, Stephen, and to thank you, Julianne. I follow you, Julianne, on Instagram. And Stephen, I watched the documentary. And right after I watched it on Friday. Right after I watched it, I looked up, IADC therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a person here. I live in Michigan. And I found a person who was trained by Dr. Botkin in Denver, and he lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've already contacted him, and I'm going to meet with him on Thursday, and he's going to interview me, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get trained in this in June.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's fantastic news.
And this was just such a heartwarming to me to know that there was a therapy. I have somebody I see right now that is in complicated grief from his son died of a drug overdose in his home, and he's in complicated grief. And I feel like this, once I learned this, I said, I have a client right now that's in complicated grief due to his son overdosing, and he found his son, it happened in his own home, and he has such self-blame. He just feels so responsible, even though he's not. But I feel like after I learn this, it's going to set him free. I just feel that that's going to happen. And I wouldn't have known about your documentary if it wasn't for Julie.
Oh,
So
great.
thank you both.
You
No,
are most
that's-
welcome.
That's the most encouraging thing that I can hear, is that someone saw the film and inspired them to go out and help others with getting through grief. So you already have been doing that anyway. And now you're just adding this other layer onto your repertoire that you'll see is really, really effective.
Oh, I don't doubt it for a minute. And my heart just aches for this client that I have, because he has such tremendous guilt. And, I've tried all kinds of things. I've done EFT with him, and his most, like I said before, anyone that I counsel for grief and loss, from children to the elderly, their most calmest time is when they speak about these incidences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
you both.
welcome. Sandy, if you email me, julie@askjulieryan.com, I'll send you some of my children's books. And in there, it talks about what happens when somebody dies, and it's interspersed with fun stuff too. But
Okay.
I've got angel messages for kids, for dogs, and for cats. And I was asked by a bunch of mothers throughout the years to please write something for children so that they could help describe what was going on. Because to your point, children, nobody has anything for children on this. And they're picture books, they're darling. They have maybe 15 sentences in them, in the whole thing, but the illustrations are darling. So if you email me, julie@askjulieryan.com, I'll send you some children's books, and hopefully you can use them with your children clients to help them.
Thank you so much,
You're
Julie. That's so
welcome.
kind. And
bet.
can you tell me that email again?
julie@askjulieryan.com.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
You bet. Who else has a question for Steve, or for me, or for both of us? Anybody? Glenda. Just gotta unmute.
Mute.
Yep.
Unmute.
There you go.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you, both of you. This is just going to really have a huge impact on the world. I just can hardly wait. I lost my daughter real tragically in 2004. And I just got so much out of seeing this film. And my son is also very impacted by this, because they were very, very close. And he's still struggling with the loss of his sister. And I want to say a couple of things that really touched my heart is at the very end, and I don't know the names, I'm so sorry, bad on names, but the really kind man who was talking to the main character, who was stubborn at first, who lost Kevin's wife, Karen, is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. She was talking about an incident, and he just made a real simple fact. He said, You don't get angry unless you're hurt and afraid. What were you afraid of? And I think she said that she was afraid that she didn't fit in the world, something along that line. I
Yeah,
don't know.
right.
And then, I mean, that just made so much sense to me. And another thing, I think the same kind man said, and this is something I'm trying now that I've seen your movie, and I think it's going to change my life and my son's life, is make time for the person that you lost, just like you would as if they were alive today.
Right. Yes.
We tell her what I'm going to do today, and just talk to her as if she were alive, just like anyone else. That is just golden, and I cannot wait to see the impact it's going to have. And I love Julie just so much. I just live every week to hear her and all the goodness she brings to the world too. And I just know that both of you are really actually just getting started to really touching the world. And I just want to say I love you both, and I so appreciate you and all the good.
That's so nice. Thank you. That's really
Thanks,
sweet.
Glenda.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's very well earned, both of you.
Julie, are you getting the sense that we should take this on the road? Should we be partners like Lewis and Clark?
Maybe. I was thinking Lucy and Desi. Oh, fun.
Which one
Anybody
am
else
I?
have Desi?
Okay.
Hey, how are you on the bongos? Oh,
That's really good to
anybody
hear,
else
though.
have
It's really nice to hear people just feeling inspired and like they feel like it made a difference, and that's really wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So welcome. So very welcome. I have one other quick question, if it's
Yes,
okay.
ma'am. Sure.
My son and my fiance and I were sitting in our bonus room watching TV, and in the adjoining room, there were some deflated happy birthday balloons, like 3 or 4 months old, and they were down. Well, Ryan, my son, who is so close to my daughter, walked past and came into the bonus room, which actually has a physical door to walk through. And he came in and he sat down. Well, the balloon slowly, rose up and made its way over to Ryan. And it was just like my daughter, she's kind of like to play tricks on people and things, and just so slowly and thoughtfully just kind of hung around him. And then she went over to me and she just came close to my feet. We were in recliners, just kind of all of us just, we were just still, we were just so amazed by this. And we kind of talked to her at the same time. And she came up like to my feet and made her way up like to hug me. And she had never met David, my fiance. And he's an emotion code practitioner. And he has his desk to his far right of that big bonus room. So anyway, I guess I can't say she walked. I guess the balloon made its way over to David, and I had said something to Brandy along the line of, "Well, this is my fiance, honey. I hope you really like him." And she came up by his feet and up close to his belly and his face and hung around there as if she were just kind of looking at him and kind of judging him, if he's okay, if he's a good guy. And I said something like, "This is where he does the emotion code to the far right." So she went over to the desk and she slowly looked at the papers and the books and so on. And then she went beneath it. Part of it's just like a counter and is underneath. She went underneath there as if she were looking then up the bookcase, looking at the books that we have in the office. And then she came back over to each of us just to it just seemed so her, and, kind of like to let us know that she was there. And then she knew we were watching TV. So that was, of course, where a TV would be on the opposite side of us. And so she went to the TV and she stayed between the TV and the wall up above and stayed there for days. So we would need to see her presence, basically. Now, does that sound crazy?
Sounds fantastic. Sounds miraculous. And she was letting you know that she was there, and she was giving you a visual in the form of a balloon, because you can't make that up. I mean, and there were 3 of you there to see it.
Yes.
So that's my take on that. What do you
Well,
think, Steve?
It sounds good to me. It does.
Don't you wish you had your camera for that episode?
Sure.
Yeah.
well,
That'd be awesome.
actually, we have some of it on videotape. She hung around for quite a while. So we have, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 minutes recorded of us talking
gosh.
to her and her moving accordingly.
Wow.
That's
wild.
fabulous.
So let me ask
Yeah.
you, I have this question. First of all, Glenda, it's a very interesting story. Maybe Julie can post some part of the video for us. My daughter will not go to bed without me. 9:15 is her bedtime. Would I be okay if I excuse myself for like 2 minutes and tucked her in and come back? Is that okay?
Yeah, let's see if anybody has any other questions. If not, we'll wrap up. Anybody else have any questions for Steve or for me? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Steve, go ahead. We'll get the question. And
Okay.
Unfortunately, we haven't seen the movie yet, and we're just wondering when we next can. We saw something on your movie's site about it being available on Suzanne Giesman's radio show or something in later this month. Is that so? Or
they
That's
just found out
next
about it
weekend.
today. They just found out about it today.
Okay,
Can
so you
we
could use Julie.
extend-
You could use your Julie's link.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
oh, okay.
I'm gonna leave that alive a little bit. I'll extend it a little bit. The
Okay.
screening. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Look
Terrific.
forward to it immensely.
I hope your daughter has sweet dreams.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Steve, or should we let him go for the evening? I think we're good, Steve. Sweet
Okay.
dreams to her. Thank you for
That was
for
great. Thank you
joining me.
everybody for coming and saying hello. And thank you so much, Julie, for letting me share with your group.
very fun. And then there'll be lots more that are watching this on live stream, and also that'll
Great.
watch the recording. So
Wonderful.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Sending you love.
Okay.
Mwah. From
Good
Sweet
night.
Home Alabama. Bye, everybody.